I'm Renee Richard, and today we're on the grounds of Notre Dame Seminary on Carrollton Avenue in New Orleans. And there are so many things here that we will learn about, but a couple of things I learned today, just to give you a clue, that the fountain out front is from the World's Fair in 1984 from the Vatican Pavilion. Also, the connection to us because the statues were done by Mestrovic, which we have so many in our diocese. One of the things behind me is the beautiful artistic rendering of the Pope's visit in 1987, when he did visit this facility as well. And that painting behind me hung in the New Orleans Museum of Art when they did the exhibit on St. John Paul II. So join us as we explore the history and what happens in this holy place of Notre Dame Seminary. We are here today in the beautiful chapel at Notre Dame Seminary. I have as my guest today, Fr James Waner. Father Jim, as you're known here. He's the rector and president of this fabulous seminary. And tell us a little bit how you ended up here, because you're not from here, correct?
No. Well, first, thanks for having me today. It's a great opportunity to talk about Notre Dame Seminary. So I'm a priest from the Diocese of Pittsburgh, and Archbishop Amon, who is the chancellor of the seminary, invited me to come here to serve as the rector in this historic and venerable place of Notre Dame Seminary. It's been a great honor. I'm in my 6 years serving here,
awesome.
And I appreciate the Baton Rouge seminarians and the men from Louisiana. It's a great place. We have a great mission, and it's good to be here. When I came here back in 2012, we had 80 seminarians, and this year we have 140.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I'm very grateful for the people who are praying for priestly vocations and the support of formation. And that's a trend we're seeing across the United States. We're seeing an increase in priestly vocations. And Notre Dame Seminary now is the third largest seminary in the United States.
Oh,
so
it's
good news. Good news.
That's great
yes.
news. Or the bulk of the seminarians native to Louisiana or to the south? Or are you seeing them from all over? Or do you gear it just to the
So
south?
it's an interesting thing. The seminarians don't choose where they go for seminary. The bishop does.
Okay,
so
good.
part of my job is to convince bishops why they should send their seminarians here to Notre Dame Seminary. So we have men from Texas, Louisiana, of course, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, up to Tennessee. And again, my responsibility is to share the good news of what we're doing and then to convince bishops why they should send their men here. So the increase is in part due to the support of the bishops
That's
here in the
great.
Gulf South and throughout the South.
And, okay, so when they come in as seminarians now, their responsibility will be to go back to their diocese? Is when you're
That's
saying
correct. Yes.
the
So,
bishop will come here?
so they come here to study, but they're sponsored by their bishop and by their diocese back home. And when they're finished here, they go back home. Their bishop ordains them. So that's the relationship.
Great.
And my title, the word rector, it's like a pastor, but the word rector means I stand in the place of the bishop. I'm not a bishop, but I stand in the place of the bishop so that I can serve as the link between that seminarian who's studying for Baton Rouge, for Memphis, back in Atlanta. That would be the connection.
Yeah, so they pretty much like answer to you as they would.
As if their bishop,
The bishop was here with
and
them.
I answer to the bishops. So
That's it. So they come to you, the men that come in here come after high school?
Right. So actually, this is the graduate level.
Okay, I knew it was
so-
a theology graduate school.
Graduate school. So there are different categories of seminarians. So there's the men who come right out of high school, so they need an undergraduate degree. So for example, the seminary on the North Shore, of which Baton Rouge supports very much, St. Joseph's Seminary. So those men are in the undergraduate level. When they finish there, then they come here for the graduate level, which is the master's degree level of formation. So that's the distinction between the two types of seminarians.
And here also, y'all do have programs, I think, there's some lay programs
That's right.
that are here as
So,
well.
You know, we have a faculty that we've recruited from all over the United States. And so we believe that our mission primarily is to form future pastors of the church. However, we'd like to make our professors, our degrees, our programs more available for the lay faithful. So we have different master's degrees for lay faithful. Some can sit in with the seminarians and be able to take their theology the way in which we're teaching it to them. Now, a lot of people work, they have other family responsibilities. So we also have a weekend program on Saturdays where lay faithful can be here. It's a full day program, and after 2-3 years, they can also leave with a master's degree in pastoral leadership or in theology itself.
Now, is that limited to men alone?
Oh, no. It's all lay people, religious.
That's what I thought. I just
men
want to
and
let
women.
our audience
Yep.
know.
It's, if everyone qualifies and wants to put the work into it, it's available to all lay faithful.
Right, and then these people would go back to the parishes and be directors of whatever the field that
Youth ministry, religious
So
education, RCIA.
RCIA, those kind of programs.
That's right.
And when was that brought into the curriculum here about? Do you know?
Well, back in the late 1980s, early 1990s is when that. Now we've been evolving those programs so that today, in the 21st century, that we're providing a formation and a training of lay faithful that speak to today's needs. So there's always an ebb and flow in how we structure those programs.
We're talking about all the programs here and the teaching that goes here and the preparation of these young men for the priesthood. But let's talk a little bit exactly about how long this has been going on in this location. I think historically, Louisiana had a seminary in the early 1800s in Platenville, which is in our diocese, and then fire took it about 1855. I don't like to give exact dates. I'm not going to tell you that. And the seminaries then were brought to New Orleans and over time have been at different locations. But I believe it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, in my readings there were a lot of different archbishops. Was it Archbishop Shaw in the 20s?
That's correct, yes.
That they did like a capital campaign and raised over $1 million in that day to have a seminary, a permanent seminary here in New Orleans. And so I think the cornerstone was around 1922, and y'all opened your doors around 1923, which is 95 years. So it's, I did the math last night as I was saying, because you go 1923, and time goes by fast when you start getting older. So that's close to the 100-year mark. So, I'm sure it has evolved over time. Anything other historically?
Well, I think, it's interesting. This is the 300th anniversary of the founding of New Orleans, right? So that was in 1718. And as your calculation has concluded, why did it take from 1718 to 1923 to finally establish a seminary? So obviously our history tells us of how Louisiana was being formed under the French, under the Spanish. We were under Canada at one point. We fell under, ecclesiastically, under Cuba. So all of these attempts of trying to open a seminary responded to the shifting of historical needs. So 1923, we finally were able to open the seminary, and we've been here since.
It's true, and what people don't realize, our audience too, is that we were the missionary territory.
That's right.
That's right. These countries, Spain and France, were so long established, and under the monarchy, Catholicism was the faith of the people. I mean, there was nothing else there. So early Louisiana was Catholic, and nothing was thought about it. But
and the interesting thing
missionaries, priests were foreign-born.
Right,
and that went to the early 1900s, really.
So France had the responsibility of sending French priests. Spain had the responsibility, and closer to home, again, that would be Cuba, that would be Canada. So in the late 1800s, as the faith is being passed on and people are learning English, the archbishops were discerning now to form a native clergy. And that actually began on the North Shore again with St. Joseph's Seminary, St. Ben's as we call it, where the Benedictines were asked to come down and open up a seminary specifically to form native clergy. And as they were graduating, that's how Notre Dame Seminary, as a graduate level seminary, then took on its own mission. But today, it's the 21st century, and in a sense, we find the needs of the Catholic Church in America as missionary. We see that with Catholics who are drifting away from the church, with a lot of people today who we can call are living a neo-atheistic lifestyle, who say they believe in God, but they belong to no religion. They identify themselves as spiritual, but not connected to the church. So how do we form priests today in the 21st century to respond to all of these different needs? And that's a discernment that Notre Dame Seminary has to take very seriously. And our bishops are key to that, because they're discerning if it's up in Shreveport or Alexandria, which is only 3 to 5% Catholic, to New Orleans, which is 65% Catholic, to Baton Rouge as well. So the bishops have to say, how does our church interact with these responsibilities? Our responsibility here at the seminary then is to teach that theology, that liturgy, that formation in a way that when the men leave here, they're capable, they're equipped to be good holy priests, but also competent in responding to today's cultural needs.
And in meeting the needs in the areas where they're going to go back to, correct?
And our Holy Father, Pope Francis, is emphasizing this for the whole church, universal, but we have to translate that into what does this mean for the Gulf South, for the southern part of the United States. And I think our men, as your listeners and viewers even talk to recently ordained priests, no place is perfect, but I can tell you, I think we're really preparing our men to be good pastors of the church.
I know the ones that we're dealing with in Baton Rouge, they're awesome. And yes, I would have to agree with what I've seen in working with some of these new young priests that are coming from here.
Right, and there was a time where a priest, a newly ordained priest, could be ordained for 5-10 years and then become a pastor. Today, our men are 2-3 years out, and so we have to be sure that they're spiritually prepared and even professionally prepared to take on the needs of today, so that whatever the ministry is in the Diocese of Baton Rouge, for example, priests are not superheroes, but we have to be equipped, as St. Paul says, we must be all things to all people, the best that we can. I think Notre Dame Seminary is fulfilling its mission in that way.
We were talking right before the break, discussing how these priests have to be prepared to come out, and they don't have that time length that they used to with being a pastor. And I know I see that just with the shortage of priests and all the churches that we have, and the clustering and that kind of thing. But so tell us, it's changed.
Right.
How it used to be.
We're called diocesan priests, right? So that means the bishop discerns the whole diocese, what are the needs, then how do I assign the priests to be able to respond to those needs? And Bishop Munch, we've had many conversations about what's happening in Baton Rouge in an exciting way, in terms of being sure our men are prepared. So there was the day where the parochial vicar would be ordained 10, 12 years, and he would learn in the rectory how to become a pastor. Today, 2-3 years out, and often you're pastoring more than one parish, 2 or 3 parishes, or the priest might have a diocesan responsibility and be serving in a parish. And even today, it's a beautiful blessing, the Latino population, which is now increasing throughout the country. So at the seminary here at Notre Dame, we have to be sure that the men can also be bilingual, that all of God's people can be ministered to. So that's another element that most seminaries in the United States have to consider, even just the language.
Right, because it used to be Latin before Vatican II.
Well, certainly,
they had to be trained fluent in Latin because the Mass was in Latin.
For the liturgical reasons.
Now, is Latin stressed as much now?
Well, for academic reasons, the seminarians still have to have Latin, even some Greek, and that's more for academic reasons. But from a pastoral standpoint, as I said, we have to train the men to respond to the needs. So what does a day look like?
I was about to say, that was my next question. What does the day
look like? What does this look like
for them here?
Well, the first thing we do is pray. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, we gather in this chapel for Eucharistic adoration, just to set the day with a solid foundation. And then there are classes all morning through the different levels of the 4 years that they're here, the graduate level. Then we have Mass here midday. And then in the afternoon, the men are assigned to different parishes, prisons, nursing homes, street ministry, evangelization, to start cultivating the skills that are needed for ministry. So that typically is in the afternoon. Then we all gather again back in the chapel here for evening prayer to praise God for that day. In between all of that, every seminarian has 2 priests assigned to him on faculty.
Okay.
One is a spiritual director who is helping the seminarian internally process what's happening. And then externally, frankly, the seminary also is an evaluative experience. We have to evaluate, is this man progressing the way he should? Humanly, spiritually, pastorally, even intellectually. Because at the end of the day, I have to say to a bishop, this man is ready or he's not. You know, that's a part of the difficult aspect of discernment and formation, where either the seminarian says, I'm not called to this, or when we have to say it.
Right, exactly. That's what I was saying. Plenty of times it takes doing it to know.
That's right.
You know, you can want something as much as you can, but to actually be able to fulfill your desire, you know, sometimes you just, you know, may not have it. And that's your role externally to know, are they ready? Because it is so much that is being thrown on the shoulders of our young priests now, you know, in the magnitude that they have to.
That's right.
Together.
So during the summers, that's another experience of formation. They're outside of the structure of seminary, but they're assigned to Spanish immersion, certainly to parishes back in the diocese, hospital ministry, nursing homes. So all of that's to complement what we're doing during the school year here as well. But at the end of the day, what we want to be sure is that the priest and priesthood is not reduced to functionalism. This is not a career. This is not a profession. This is a relationship. It's a vocation that the man has with the Lord. It's like family life and marriage as well. However, as diocesan priests, we're not living this vocation in a nebulous way. Pope Francis not long ago spoke to seminarians and said, the Catholic Church and the priesthood is not a museum. We're not just something to look at. The liturgy is not a performance. It's supposed to touch the lives of people practically. And so this relationship and this vocation, while it's his, the seminarian, it's always at the service of God's people. And that's the mission of Notre Dame Seminary, to prepare these men to go into the vineyard and serve God's people.
Father Jim, while you were talking, something came to mind to me. We were talking about how they come in here for morning prayer. Are all of the seminarians living here, you know, on site in this facility?
Yes.
Because it's like a regular university, right? It has a lot of different components.
Exactly. So we have, as I said, 140 seminarians, and they all live here. So from mid-August to mid-May, like a typical academic year. So the campus here is able to house all the seminarians. And we're very grateful to our benefactors who have, on the one sense, retained the character of a 1923 campus, and yet we're in the 21st century. So we've had some very generous benefactors that have allowed us to provide the seminarians the type of buildings, campus, training, classrooms, technology that's required. But a part of that formation is also human formation. We have a gym. We've got a swimming pool. The guys play basketball, tennis. We got a volleyball tournament. Actually, we have a soccer tournament between St. Joseph's Seminary and our men, which we usually win. The annual football game. So all of this corresponds to how the men take care of their own human formation as well. We have the library, the auditorium, all the spaces that are required for good research and training. So, as I mentioned with our benefactors, the owner of the Saints, the New Orleans Saints,
Mr. Benson.
The late Mr. Benson, they've been very generous to us. They've given us $13 million over these last 7-8 years. Not to turn this into anything more than what it is. Simplicity of life is essential to the life of a priest. But we have a beautiful campus that's conducive for prayer, for study, for human formation, and for good friendship as well. So I hope your viewers will have a chance to get a sense of, of our campus here.
I've been told your library is fabulous.
Yes, so, as a good theological, philosophical library. And it's open to the public. So if any of your viewers ever are passing through Notre Dame here to visit our library and have a chance to even come to this chapel, Mass is open to the public. So Monday through Friday during the school year, Mass is at 11:45, And again, hopefully more and more people can get to know who we are and what we're about
That's
by
awesome. And
visiting the campus.
To let y'all know how simple that was when we got here this morning. When we parked, literally you walk in the front doors and you're facing the doors of the chapel. It's centrally located right in the center of this beautiful chateau-looking, building that's here, and it's a very beautiful chapel as well. You're such a great speaker. When I get these thoughts, usually I jump right in, but he's so eloquent, I don't want to jump in. But we were talking about the students that come here, and one thing that came to mind is how different, how broad, and how different. I guess I was going to ask you about that.
Their backgrounds.
Their backgrounds. And
what's interesting,
what's here.
The late St. John Paul II always described the seminary as an apostolic community. So when you think of the apostles, right, you had reputedly John, who was 13, 14 years old as an apostle. You had Peter, who owned his own fishing business. You had Matthew, who was a tax collector, worked for the government. You had Judas trying to overthrow the government. So the Lord brought all of these men together and wanted for them to relate to him as a community. The seminary is the same way. It's an apostolic community. We've got men here who are just right out of LSU, right out of college, with business backgrounds, engineering backgrounds. I've got several men who are widowed. They're widowers who've been married, they're grandfathers, they have children and grandchildren. I've got many seminarians who are in the military. Many of our seminarians are converts, either Christians who have become Catholic, and that conversion has brought them into the seminary. Many who drifted away from the Catholic Church as Catholics, then had a conversion experience that's bringing them back. So when you have 140 men with all of these different life experiences,
walks of life,
and of our 140, over 40 of the seminarians their country of origin is not the United States.
Oh.
I got seminarians who were studying for the United States, from Vietnam, from Colombia, from Kenya, from Nigeria, England. We have a wide range of seminarians from around the world who are studying to become priests for the United States. So age, ethnic, and even just their own spiritual backgrounds. So it makes for an interesting community.
It does. Now, when you were talking about these other countries coming in here, their bishop, they're coming here to be diocesan priests in the United States for other dioceses, right? They won't be returning to their countries. They're coming here to serve us.
We have one or two relationships where, in fact, it's a part of our mission, you might say, to help form some of these men who will go back to their country. That's a long-standing relationship. But most of them are here either as immigrants. We have men who've escaped oppression with their families, and then while they're as Catholics, while they're here, the vocation then is introduced to them. And so that's a very powerful experience for us to understand that as Americans, we have freedom. And how that freedom is being lived and practiced up against when you hear some of the oppression, economic and political, from around the world. So it challenges us even within the seminary, or our older seminarians who, as I mentioned, some of them are parents and grandparents. You know, they have a lived experience of life that maybe the 23-year-old seminarian doesn't have. But he has the zeal, the 23-year-old. He has maybe a theological precision. All of that enriches the presbyterate, it enriches the seminary community, and so their formation isn't just in the classroom, their formation is with each other. They challenge each other. They're brothers in a sense. They call each other out, and that's what the Lord intended when he gathered those initial apostles together, that relationship would be the bond by which those men as apostles would be formed and then sent out into the world. And we're doing the same thing in a very beautiful way with the diversity that is here, yet with the common mission, which is never superseded by any sense of diversity. It's to save souls. That's who we are as a church.
Right. And the seminary has been doing that for the 95 years. But I think it's very interesting because I think when it began 100 years ago, 95 years ago, we had all these churches and we had all these foreign priests that were in it. And you would, I know in our diocesan sacramental records, we see several different priests that are within one parish. Say Donaldsonville might have 6, and one might be Italian, one might be the other. So it's like you said, when they would come to the seminary, they weren't experiencing that same diversity you're talking about now. I think the Lord provides, because back then they were probably more homogenic. I don't know if that's the right term.
Right.
But they were going out and then working under all of these other nationalities, these other older priests, these other communities that had that. So the evolution is there, and we think of it as, oh my goodness, things are changing, but the Lord has a funny way of beautiful way of doing all of this, that now we're seeing it here because it's not available in the churches. So it's truly the Lord at work.
Well, the Lord teaches us in the scripture how the faith is unchanging. Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But the circumstances certainly can change.
So true.
It was noted earlier, years and years ago, it was priests who formed the seminary. So all the faculty were always priests. Today, we have to bring the best. So we've got lay men and women who are trained theologians and philosophers that we have to recruit from around the United States. That would be something that you didn't see 30, 40 years ago.
You're right.
Specialists who see in themselves, they're not just teaching, you could teach at a university and do a great job, but men and women who are trained professors, and to bring that expertise to the seminarians. I think that's also been a positive development in today's culture, that the laity are directly contributing to the formation of priests as professors and faculty. But even back at home, there's a highly evaluative process by which the lay people, when seminarians are assigned to your parish, they help evaluate.
Oh, okay.
They help form, they help give wisdom, and be able to contribute to formation.
That's amazing. The one thing mentioned real quick, because we're just about done, and that I think was when I was looking at the faculty here, that you have there's 35, 40, 35. So when you think of 140 young men, they really will know their teachers. They're like family also.
Exactly, yeah.
So, well, Father Jim, it's been a great experience
to
learn more
yes.
about this great seminary, and I can't thank you enough for your time. So, folks, join us again for another episode of Roots of Faith.